How is everybody doing? Strength Chat episode 90, and today I've not got one, I have got two very special guests for you. Today I'm joined by two coaches who have worked with multiple athletes at national and international level. Today I am joined by Alfred Jong and Kedric Kwan. How are you both doing?
Thanks for having me again, Steve. It's last time was a lot of fun, and this time's gonna be even better now that we got Kedric on board.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having Alfred and myself on. I mean, we both of us talk a lot about training on our free time. Not exactly what a lot of people do on their free time, but it's good to just be here and just share. And yeah, looking forward to a good podcast.
Awesome. So obviously chatted to you, Alfred, a couple of weeks ago. But Alfred and Kedric, what have you been both up to? What's been happening in your worlds?
Kedric, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I mean, right now, so I'm currently actually based in New Zealand. So technically, I'm one day ahead of most of your listeners, I would say, and even the two of you. I'm working on my PhD, looking at rapid weight cutting strategies and how that impacts strength sport athletes. And yeah, so that's basically it. The most of the time, I'm right now I'm in the stage of submitting my proposal for data collection. So yeah, just working hard on that, and yeah, that's basically my life right now till the end of November.
A lot of stuff to keep you out of trouble then and keep you busy.
Yeah, I mean, New Zealand's pretty tame anyway. Like the malls, like places close at 5, so not much trouble to get into.
All right, okay. Where in New Zealand is it you're based?
Auckland, so the big city, Auckland.
Okay. Oh, nice. And Alfred, what's been happening with you?
Well, I just came back from the USAPL Raw Nationals, where Taylor had his 6th consecutive win. So it's huge for us. We had a really good showing there. We posted on Instagram, but we had about, I can't remember the exact number, I think over 10 athletes compete all together. And we got we got one M1 national champion, which is Kedric's athlete, a couple juniors, Taylor. So overall, we did fantastic. Next week, I'll be off to Toronto for the provincial championships. And then in about 2 weeks from then, so kind of mid-November, I'll be off to Vietnam for a seminar.
Okay. Oh, nice. So plenty of things to look forward to.
Yeah.
So obviously setting up there, I've been looking forward to this chat since we set up the email. And for everyone listening, Alfred and Kedric are a dynamic duo. They both work together with coaching athletes. So do you just want to give a little bit of a background about how that came about, how you both got involved with the strength guys and ended up working as a team together?
Right. I think I can start my stories a little bit more recent because Alfred has been in the strength guys slightly longer. I started around almost, I would say right now approaching 2 years. Actually, as under the strength guys, including my internship time, is slightly more than 2 years. But as a coach, it's almost 2 years now. So I started off as an intern while writing up my master's thesis while I was in London, and basically approached Jason from the strength guys, asking them if they needed someone, basically an intern, and at that time the strength guys didn't have a guy or a coach focusing on nutrition, and my master's was in sports and exercise nutrition. So Jason thought that it was a good idea to bring someone with nutrition background on. I mean, I started doing things like graphic design, making infographics, a lot of like the back end stuff as well. That was a good learning process for sure. I think everybody should dabble in that sometime, not to an extensive level, but just to have a rough idea. And then 6 months after my internship, I met up with Jason in London. When he came down after the World Championship in Belarus, and we met up, we talked, and he said, like, if you want to come on board, I've been very happy with your work as an intern. I'm glad to bring you on board. So, and then I said, I'll be a coach, and that brings me where I am. Definitely have improved a ton over the years. Learned a lot, especially with Alfred doing co-coaching, just bouncing ideas off each other and just learning from one another. So yeah, really thankful for all my past experiences and all that I've learned.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Alfred, do you want to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, I kind of went into a more extensive explanation last time, so I'll kind of do it brief. So essentially, I was a powerlifter and I was in need of a coach. So I hired Jason, and not long after he saw some of my work and was interested in bringing me on as a coach. So that's kind of how my journey started. And when I remember when we were considering the idea of bringing in an intern, and I had no idea who it was. Actually, I was on my way to Singapore, and somebody reached out to me on Facebook, and I had no idea who it was, never heard of this guy before, and turns out to be Kedric. And we started chatting up from there. Next thing you know, he was our intern, so we kind of had some opportunities to collab together for, like you mentioned, for the infographics and whatnot. And when he came on board, we started bouncing ideas back and forth. I kind of showed him like what I'm working on. This is what some of the issues are and what are his thoughts. And we just bounce ideas back and forth, and he would do the same thing. And about a year later, we came up with the idea that, hey, why don't we actually work together on athletes? Obviously, we can't take on a lot because we both have pretty full plates, but I think it'd be a great collaboration, having his background in nutrition, my background in sports performance, and combining them together.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I know. I think there's been an old mentality of, if you sign up for a coach, you only sign up to that one person, and you only ever have that dealings with one person. I know for me, there's quite a lot of coaches in my local area that we like to bounce ideas off each other, and I think it's good to have that network around you to be able to. Do you think this is a good idea? I want to give this a go, or other people might have their own expertise that you can sort of pick their brains about. So, in terms of working together, how has it been working with the athletes that you've both worked with? Is it a case of one person takes a step back and while the other person's taking a lead, depending on what's happening? How do you two go about working together with an athlete?
Yeah, I'll just start out here. I think the beauty of co-coaching is that one, obviously, you need to find someone that you see things eye to eye in terms of programming. But that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the other person says. But obviously, the principles, you have to have the same the fundamental principles has to be the same, so that's one. And that makes things really easy. Alfred and I, we always have a joke when we come to like making decisions. We just say like, you are me, I am you. We think the same, just do it, that kind of stuff. And it's been really true with the athletes that we've been coaching. So usually what we do is that we would delegate the roles, right? Sometimes depending on time zone and regions and stuff like that, because obviously things like if someone messages like 5 hours ago, I'll definitely be asleep. But Alfred will be awake. So we tend that for an athlete in that region, Alfred might take charge a little bit more just because it's easier to communicate. And for athletes closer to my region, I would tend to take charge a little bit more just because of the ease of communication and things like that. But I would say that both of us are equal in terms of how much we contribute, because we don't see it as like, oh, this Alfred recruit this athlete, this is Alfred's athlete and I'm just helping out. When Alfred recruits someone, it's our athlete. We don't see it as an individual and then like, oh, Alfred's Batman and I'm Robin. I was about to say Alfred's Batman and I'm Alfred, but then it'd be really confusing. Yeah, so it's Alfred's Batman and I'm Robin. It's more of like, you're a tag team kind of thing. So we work hand in hand, and usually what happens, we do discuss the plan prior to writing a new training block, and depending on who's in charge, we would that person would draft the training block out and then bounce it across the other person, and then we just continue refining that as we go.
Oh, cool. How have you found from the feedback from the athletes that you've worked with, how have they found working with two coaches? Have they found it to be a lot more beneficial, that there's a little bit more support there, or what has the feedback been?
So far it's been good. Like Kedric said, because we're from two different time zones, the rate of response tends to be a lot quicker because we don't have that lag time where one of us is sleeping. That's typically a case with myself or even Kedric when we're working with individual athletes. When we're sleeping or busy with work or whatever, we can't always attend to them right away. Yeah. This way, we have a wider range of availability, so the feedback is much quicker. We can also adjust a lot of things just because he has his nutrition background, and so if there's ever a question about nutrition, if it kind of stumps me, then he can jump in right away. Or if he will jump in if he sees fit, and vice versa. So all in all, it's been working really, really well. We complement each other, and as Kedric was mentioning, typically if we need to make any kind of executive decision, we'll consult with each other first before actually implementing or communicating to the athlete. If it's little things like form critique, we both have the same fundamentals. We both know what to look for. So we don't really need to consult with each other at that point. But if it's something big, then we'll talk on the side first, then we'll relay the message back.
Yeah. So just sort of diving into that a little bit more, you've both sort of mentioned that there's a few things that you'll both agree on. There might be a few things that you might not necessarily agree on. So what are sort of some of the topics that you've had to chat about with a lifter that you both don't agree on or have got different views on, and how do you sort of go about putting the plan forward? Because with the coaches that I work with, there's some things that I think work really well, but then they've had success doing something completely different. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think everyone, that's what makes life interesting. People having different ideas, different thoughts. So how do you two both go about putting those plans in place for or different thoughts on things?
Yeah. Would you like me to start, Alfred?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the big part is, like I say, despite having the fundamental principles very similar to one another, there's bound to have disagreement. I mean, like Dr. Mike Zordos over at FAU tells all his students, after graduating, and if you agree with me on everything, it means I failed, which means that is coming from the assistant professor in teaching his master's in SNC. Saying that, I'm teaching you the principles. You have to formulate your own thoughts. I like to think of science, or at least exercise science, is not prescriptive, but it's actually descriptive. So it describes something, and then you formulate your own thoughts, and then prescribe. Or maybe don't use prescribe, use recommend, because I know some doctors can get really triggered when I say prescribe. But recommend based on the amalgamation of your thoughts and the principles. So I think the big thing for Alfred and I would say that, I really acknowledge this, is that Alfred worked his athletes harder than me. Because I also think it's because I got Alfred to write a program for me, and Alfred really worked me to the bone, right? And it paid off in the end. So I definitely know that Alfred worked his athletes more than me. And I don't think this is disagreement on the fundamental level per se. It's more of I tend to err on the side of caution, but Alfred knows his athletes well. I think the big part of coaching is not just throwing out periodization principles, intensity, and volume. It's more about knowing what the athlete can handle and knowing that that athlete would be able to tolerate the workload that you provide. So I think if we have any disagreement, it's more on a contextual basis from an individual level rather than a principal level. So I would just say, for us, we pretty much just say, what about this? We don't actually say, oh, I disagree with you. The way you do things suck. We just say, what about this? Have you thought about this? Have you considered this? And I would just say we approach everything very respectfully, even though sometimes we might not agree.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And when you're saying there about working with athletes, on an individual basis, and it's not just about the programming side of things. I've had it before where, having people, you get to know the people, the clients and the lifters that you work with, and you get to know how far to push them and drop them back. And that's why I thought it was really interesting when you said, you both work together and both have communication with the athlete, because it has been before, when, for example, I was away on holiday and a couple of other coaches trained my clients. And sometimes it is a little bit exactly like you said, Kedric. It's a little bit like, oh well, today I'm only with Robin. I don't have Batman, so I don't really need to do much. Which that's a good way of putting it. Alfred, what are your thoughts on that?
This is exactly why we co-coach. He took the words right out of my mouth. So, for lack of better words, I'm pretty much the hard ass out of the two. I'm the bad guy. He's a good guy.
Yeah, good cop, bad cop.
Exactly. I program what's necessary to really take the athletes to where they need to go. Kedric, on the other hand, he will do it in a more personal and a little bit more conservative way because of how he knows that specific athlete. So if we're working together on one of his athletes, he knows that they mentally are not always prepared to handle such a high workload. So we consult with each other. Okay, this is the foundation that we need. This is what we need to put them through. From your experience, how can we manipulate that so that they can still get the work done, but it's more tangible for that individual? Yeah. Whereas for me, I usually program it out and I'll have the athletes do it. And I will do I will communicate with them if they are having troubles. That's where I make the adjustments on the fly through communication, whereas he will do it on the program.
Yeah, it's good. I think a lot of people, just from a coach's point of view, it's quite nice to see. And, this is why I set up the podcast to, speak to other coaches. I think it may be in some areas coaches can be sometimes a little bit afraid to chat with other coaches and, have that genuine discussion of, what do you think? Have you ever thought about this? And no defensiveness, just because at the end of the day, the end result is what's going to be best for the lifter, the athlete, or the client that you're working with. So it sounds really good that and especially seeing the success that you've had with the lifters that you've had so far. Can you both see more coaches sort of teaming up and working with athletes, or where do you see this going?
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Alfred. You go first, Alfred.
Just being at Raw Nationals, I got a chance to communicate with several coaches. So Joe from TSA, Matt Gary, being able to bounce these ideas back and forth. The reputable coaches, we all like Kedric and I, we have the same foundations, just the approach is slightly different. So it's really good to be able to bounce those ideas back and forth and actually acknowledge the positive differences between the two. I think one of the misconceptions is that coaches will tend to butt heads and save their thoughts and their protocols for themselves. But most of the time, that's not the case. All of us, we want the best for the athletes, so we always try to chime in and see how can we help each other, how can we help the sport grow as a whole. So I personally think there should be more collaborations, even between companies as well. I think that can benefit the sport by a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Kedric, do you want to jump in there and your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the big part, like what Alfred said, he being around nationals, obviously I'm on this side of the world, but I've been to Worlds twice now, like in Calgary, which is actually the first time Alfred and I met in person, and also this year in Sweden. And like say, when I go to events like this in Calgary, I met a lot of people because it's my first time being in an international powerlifting scene, and there are a lot of top coaches. I met like people from TSA. I connected well with like Joe Stannard from TSA because we are roughly the same age. Yeah, and then so we connected quite well. And then fast forward like up to like today, we still talk about like training principles. And then I know Alfred does it as well because Alfred and Joe share Airbnb while they're in Raw Nationals. So having ideas and having discussions, and I think it's more of like keeping like ego aside, and believing that we're doing this not for personal glory, but more of like, we have to develop our athletes and we have to develop the sport. So if we bounce ideas of each other collectively as a whole, we might be able to solve more problems. I spent some time talking to like Mike Tischer, which is really strange because when I first started powerlifting and I read the reactive training system manual, which I think it was back in like 2008, I had no idea whatsoever how to digest that amount of information. But right now, like fast forward 11 years later, I'm having conversations with Mike about solving certain ways we think about volume, about fatigue and all of that kind of stuff. And Mike's just a guy that's like, he's probably like the GOAT of like auto regulations for strength training. And he's just like, just chat, we bounce ideas off each other, and there really isn't ego or like, I'm trying to steal his ideas or he's trying to steal mine. I don't get that kind of vibe, and I definitely hope he doesn't get that kind of vibe from me. And like, even for one of my mates based in Dublin, so he's also a PhD researcher looking at very similar things, right? His name's David Nolan, and I kind of like started looking at rapid weight cutting strategies, and then he looked at it slightly later than me, probably a couple of months or maybe 6 months later. And then we realized that, instead of us thinking of it as, competing on who publishes more or who researches more, we just like, dude, that we only have so much, our resources are only so finite, I can do certain things, you can do certain things. And so the way we see and approach research might not be the same. So let's bounce ideas off each other, and we make sure that whatever you do, I don't do it unless I'm trying to improve and replicate your study and improve on it, right? If you did everything well and you feel like this is quite a good study, I can do something else. So it's more of like, just collectively putting our resources and time and energy together and just trying to look at improving the sport as a whole. And I think on the individual level, like what Alfred said, working as co-coaches within the company is great, but there should be collaborations outside the company, because, if both parties can just say, yeah, we want the best for the sport, we want the best for our athletes, and it really isn't about you and me, because at the end of the day, even though like powerlifting, my athlete goes against yours, if if your athlete beat mine, I'm not going to say, yeah, I hate you because your athlete beats me, we'll go out. Oh, it's actually really funny because Alfred and I, before we started co-coaching, the first time we met in Calgary, Alfred had an athlete against my athlete. And the first time we met, we sort of like met in the arena, and we competed against one another. And it was cool, right? Like, I mean, my athlete won. We had to pull for the win, and it was a small margin, right? But we went out, we would chill. I spent like a couple of weeks with Alfred and Rhonda and stuff. Like, if Alfred really hate me, like, he could probably kill me in my sleep because I was just staying in his house, but it's not like that at all, The whatever happens in the professional game on comp day doesn't really seep into our personal life. And I think that's really important to have that distinction if we really want to improve the sport through collaboration and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I think, come game day, yes, everything's going to be focused on your lifter, making sure that they're getting the best result. But one of the key things I picked out from what you said there, Kedric, was, problem solving. And trying to figure out what's going to be the best way, because if someone is doing something really, really well, and that doesn't mean to say that everything's going to be copied from them, but there's some things that you can pick out of and think, all right, so how can I use this to improve my lifter? And the more that powerlifting grows, and that's what people want to see. People want to see, it being really close and people lifting more weight and, pushing the boundaries a little bit more of what can be lifted. So it's really good to hear that coaches such as yourselves are wanting more collaboration. And that's why, having this podcast and speaking to coaches such as yourselves, I'm hoping that, more information is getting out there so powerlifting can grow and people can get involved in strength training and all that sort of stuff, which, is great to hear. You both mentioned, obviously, both on the principles of the programming side of things and, from sports performance and nutrition. One of the topics that I wanted to touch on is when you're working with lifters, and there's been a couple of lifters that will compete in a certain weight class for maybe a couple of years, and then you'll all of a sudden find them in another weight class, or, potentially drop down. Have you both found that drop down, or even more often than not, an increase in a weight class has come naturally, or is it a case of you look at a lifter and think actually they might perform better in a higher weight class? What are both your sort of thoughts on that?
Sure. So it's highly individual. So I'll take my girlfriend, for instance. She's kind of the one-off. So naturally, she sits around 56, 57 kilos. And at last year's Worlds, we cut down to 47, which is pretty big cut and that kind of skewed Kedric's survey a little bit because everybody's kind of cuts around the 5% range and we're about the 20% range. But the reason being is we're together all the time. I know what her nutrition's like. I can, adjust things literally on the fly. For the average lifter, typically, once they start exceeding, I would say the 7-ish% body weight, and they look relatively lean, I think it's a good and they're having to do copious amount of volume and they're not really seeing those results. I think that's about time to consider moving up a weight class. One of my athletes, Nicola, actually, she's a 52 kilo weight class. For nationals last year, she was doing X amount of volume, just drowning in volume. And the gains we saw was marginal. Fast forward to this month where she's preparing for provincials, we've slashed the volume in half, but she's up a weight class. We're not sure if this is the weight class for her just now, but the goal is to not worry about her weight. Just eat naturally, just focus on training. And she's hypothetically increased her total by about 50 kilos with half the volume. So those kind of things are great indications that, okay, maybe a higher weight class is more beneficial to you than to be, stuck in that one weight class and constantly having to diet down and divide your efforts between training and nutrition, and sacrifice some recovery time.
Yeah. Kedric, what's your take on that?
Yeah. I was just listening to what Alfred said, and then I kind of formulated my thoughts as well. And you would notice like our difference in personality just because Alfred really spoke upon like the performance outcome, and I would speak something that's completely not the performance outcome. So you can tell like, yeah, this is literally like how we program as well. It's really weird that I caught on to that, but I really think the first thing I would consider is the age of the lifter. I am quite against. I wouldn't say against, but or strongly opposed. Wouldn't say strongly opposed, but I would recommend that if someone is young, they shouldn't be thinking of constantly cutting weight. Yeah. That is mainly because especially when it comes to prolonged periods of calorie deficit, you think about it this way, right? You are at the peak and prime age to grow, right? In terms of maturity, but you are depriving yourself of essential nutrients that could potentially fuel that growth, not just from a powerlifting or strength perspective, but more of a growth and maturation and health perspective as well. So I would always tell lifters, especially if there's no records on the line or whatever, if you're young and you're like still in the junior class, don't actually think of really cutting weight, because now is when you really maximize your time building that strong base, And then if you're in it for the long game, right? So that is the caveat you have to apply. If you're in it for the long game, you shouldn't think of cutting right now. But a lot of those like young guns right now, they like to think, I have to do this in 1 year, and 1 year I'm going to do every single thing. And then I like to think that is not the mentality people should approach the sport. I mean, for example, look at Susie Gary, right? Susie Hardwick Gary, Matt Gary's wife. She's been in the game for ages and like numerous records to her name, and she's still lifting. Look at David Rakes, right? Yeah. 60 years old, squatting more than 300 kilos, and all that kind of stuff. Anthony Harris and all that kind of people, right? They've been in it for ages. Even my athlete that I coach at Raw Nationals this year, he's like 50 years old and he's still lifting. So he's been lifting longer than I've been alive. Things like that. So you have to think about it from that perspective. If you really want to maximize your gains in the future, don't try not to cut weight too often or too frequently, because I find that is just potentially creating negative impact in the long run. And another thing I would like to say is that something to consider is that if you're tall and really lanky, you probably have to move up a weight class, because I believe that weight classes are height classes in disguise. Because if you're tall, if you're really tall, you're already carrying more mass just by having a larger skeleton. So essentially, if you're the same weight as someone who's shorter, that person technically has more maybe like muscles, or at a relatively similar leanness, right? The person probably has more muscles and whatever, just because you're carrying more skeleton and muscles. More muscles are always great, because it's more contractile tissue, and you can produce more force with more muscle. So those are the things I actually consider: age, height, and I always observe this it's very interesting when you go to Worlds. I observe the junior class and I look at some guys and they'll be like weighing in at like 100 grams or like 10 to 20 grams at the weight, and they're junior. And I'm in my head, it's like if they train more, they're not going to be in this class anymore, because as you train, you will gain muscle. And if you're already so lean and you struggle to make weight, when you reach the open division, you're definitely not going to be in the same weight class anymore. And thinking of like, yeah, you know, you can do this time and time over again, like what Alfred said when he mentioned Nicola, you might just shortchange your gains, you know. You can just keep smashing yourself all the training. But if your cut is so drastic, or if you're constantly cutting weight, your training gains might not be what you think you should based on the amount of work that you put in.
Yeah, I think why I asked that question there was, you know, when people, myself having a couple of lifters first getting involved in powerlifting, they're always worried about what weight class they need to be in. Whereas really, exactly like you both said there, as a beginner powerlifter, you don't need to worry about that. Have you found that people will get to a certain point where things will level out and they'll just stay in that certain weight class? Is there a certain amount of a certain age, or when people get to a point where, right, you've actually settled on your own weight class, once they've gone through the process of, you know, just getting in the process of training, getting into competitions, and then everything just sort of settles out?
Me personally, I find that athletes kind of after about 27-ish years old, they tend to kind of plateau out and their weight class is a little bit more predictable. As Kedric mentioned, they kind of stopped growing, especially when they're juniors and kind of even the first year or so of open, they're still growing. They're still in that kind of peak performance stage where they can still put on a good amount of muscle. Whereas when you're 30, I wish I could put on muscle that fast. I wish I can gain that much faster, but that's just not the case. So me personally, I find like kind of around the 27-year-old range is when there's really not a whole lot of fluctuation. Like Taylor, for instance, he's been 74 for quite some time, or always. Yeah. And Kedric does his nutrition, and the amount he has to cut is pretty similar year to year. Might be a little bit more challenging as the years go on, but basically we from what I understand, it's more or less the same routine.
Kedric, have you got anything on that? Or?
Yeah, completely agree with what Alfred says. I think once you reach a certain age, and not just a certain age, but more of like also a certain training age, right? So once you, I mean, if you're 27 and you've never resistance trained in your life, once you start lifting weights, you probably gain muscle. But once you reach a high level of training and you hit a certain training age, you actually plateau, because we know that the gains are not linear, right? You do get the newbie gains at the start and whatnot. So, but for example, a very good example that Alfred quoted was like Taylor Atwood, right? He's been around this weight for like 6 times national champion at the 74 kilo class. It means that he competed for 74 kilos for at least 6 years in a row, you know? So that tells us that, yeah, his weight has plateaued. And also because Taylor's a very high level athlete, he's been training for like years. I mean, if you watch whatever like De Novo documentary that they filmed, he said that, yeah, you know, I mean, lifting weights for football, American football, right, at a really young age. And for example, another person like, if I'm not mistaken, Bryce Lewis, so he moved up to the 105, right? And before that, he was in the lower weight class. But right now, from what I understand, and especially just having like conversations with Bryce and his coach, Eric Helms, which is my PhD supervisor, I know that he makes weight relatively easy. And obviously, he has that dialed down as well. So I would say that once you reach a certain training age and know that you perform really comfortably and you still can make gains, that would be the age you stop at. And there's also the issue of like body image as well. It tends to be a little bit less pronounced in male lifters, but I know female lifters, they almost always, if you ask them to think about moving up a weight class, they almost always would consider not to, which is really difficult, because if you know the women's weight class, the 63 kilo weight class and the 72 kilo weight class is massively apart. It's huge, right? And like that's like at least like 9 kilos of weight, you know. And for a female, like, man, 9 kilos of weight is not exactly the most appealing thing to have, right? So sometimes body image could actually affect whether someone want to move up, and if they're comfortable with how they look and how they perform, especially for the females. And I'm not quoting this to draw gender differences, but in the research, they actually show that females actually tend to have more body image when it comes to cutting weight. So that's something that could play a role as well. It's just like, yeah, I'm comfortable how I look, how I feel. I like the food amount I can eat, and I like what I'm training. So I'll just stay at this weight. So
yeah, absolutely. It's a good point you touched on there. I know for me, I went up a weight class, and I got really strong. All my weights went up. Squatted, benched, and deadlifted the heaviest that I've had. And but the only thing was that as I started putting weight on, there was obviously my physique changed quite a lot. But in terms of a health point of view, and when it came to doing it from a performance point of view, a little bit more volume, the recovery side of things took me so long. And then, dialing in my nutrition a little bit more, and, speaking with my coach and working towards it, everything turned a little bit more of into a positive. So, I got even stronger, but also, it wasn't taking me forever to recover from sessions. So what have been there from both sides, from a nutrition and a programming side of things, where have things gone poorly, and how people can sometimes go wrong in increasing a weight class, and what sort of the best practices of if you are looking to, go up a weight class?
Kedric, you want to go ahead?
Yep. So I think a big part would be obviously everything is context specific. So the answer is usually always it depends. But just to give some thoughts, throw some thoughts out there, I would think that gaining weight rapidly would not necessarily be a good thing. Especially if you're concerned with how you look, because we know muscle grow at a slower rate than you put on fat. So gaining weight really rapidly would potentially cause more fat gain. I mean, there is study done by Garth and colleagues, where one group actually consumed at least 500 calories more than the other, but the rate of muscle gain was the same. But the other group that consumed more calories actually doubled the amount of fat they stored. So there is a limit to, or threshold to, how much muscle you can gain. But I would say a big mistake people always think that I need to get this fast, and it's not just with weight gain. It's more of like I think that if I gain a lot of weight really fast, then I'll gain a lot of like kilos on my lifts really quick. And I think having that mentality of I want it now, I want it fast, could potentially be detrimental to overall progress. I would say for most people, especially for powerlifters, I think doing like hypertrophy work could be really beneficial as well. And I think a reason why a lot of like powerlifters at a high level don't really see much changes in their weight is that most people don't really dedicate time to like a long hypertrophy block. Granted, most people they don't put on that much muscle mass as well, but a lot of them is focused. We're focused as a powerlifter. We're focused on the outcome, which is strength at the end. But I would say that having hypertrophy blocks could actually help, and research out there to chase that steady eat more just to know that you can feel better during training, but not to the point where you have to stuff yourself consistently. But obviously track your progress of weight gain. You should be gaining anywhere between 0.5% to 1% of body weight a month. Lower if you're a higher level athlete. And like I say, don't have the mentality that I want it now, I want it quick, and that instant gratification mentality could be quite detrimental. So
and to kind of try to tack on that, like we're finding that it kind of goes both ways. Some people are really fixed on dieting down because they want that Wilks. Well, before it was Wilks, now it's IPF points. But they're always chasing that 400, 500 Wilks or whatever it is. But they kind of miss the grand scheme of things, and that's the total. If you don't have that total, it doesn't really matter if you have 500 Wilks. If every top 10 is 500 Wilks, well, you top 10, but you didn't win, right? So that's one thing to consider when chasing Wilks. That's one thing I try to talk about all the time. But also, as Kedric mentioned, when on the flip side, when people are gaining weight, people want it now. They think that the more they eat, the whole like eat to grow kind of mentality, whereas they decide to go up a weight class and they're just force feeding themselves. But there's a certain point where you're not gaining anything other than body fat, and at that point now you're just not healthy. Where you're just putting on so much body fat, you're not actually doing anything in terms of recovery and performance after a certain point.
Yeah.
So it's kind of pointless, and at that point now you're just an unhealthy individual that you're not gaining at any quicker rate.
Absolutely, and you both mentioned there a couple of times health. If you're not healthy, I know obviously there'll be there's quite a lot of powerlifters that are listening, people that or athletes listening, but there's that saying that every human is an athlete and every athlete is a human. If you're not healthy, you're not going to be able to perform as much. So it is finding that balance. And in terms of obviously at the top level, you've mentioned there that it'll get to a point where there's only so much muscle that they can put on, or there's only so much leeway that they've got. I think at the sort of the beginner and intermediate level, because everybody wants it now, I think sometimes because there's a lot more information coming out about going up weight classes, cutting weight and best practices. But I think a lot of people can swing too far one way, exactly like you've said, of wanting to just eat the way to get bigger, and they end up getting a little bit unhealthy. Or they think, oh, well, I need to add in some more hypertrophy work. And then as powerlifters, they actually start adding in a lot more of other rubbish that actually deters from what they need to be doing, which is, dialing the technique on their squat, bench and deadlift, and and focusing on that. In terms of the best practices of making sure that people are in terms of training and sort of between competitions, how have you both sort of worked to make sure that people stay at sort of a consistent weight, and if they need to drop down, any weight cutting strategies that you've used?
Right. For me personally, I usually make sure the ones that are pretty consistent in weight, I try not to, I usually don't advocate that they stay within that weight class, even if it's a minor cut, just because the quality of life isn't always the best. And when you're doing off-season work where it's higher volume, you want to be able to recover as best as possible. So I typically recommend about the 5 to 6% over their competition weight. And that's usually a fairly conservative drop if they need to. And, usually, like for myself, I usually try to recommend that they, if it's within a 5 to 6%, it's quite easy to diet down as long as you tighten everything up as far as nutrition wise. Or there's the water loading approach, which again isn't a huge drop if it's within that 5 to 6% range.
Yeah. Kedric?
I think a big part would be, like say, setting the upper limit, right? So setting the upper limit of what you can cut from. That it's more of like having the end goal in mind and make sure you don't exceed that, because that would be way too difficult to cut, and that could potentially impact performance. Like I say, Alfred uses 5 to 6%. I tend to be a little bit more conservative. I use a 4 to 5%. I mean, 1% difference, right? But and what I think a big part is that you also have to plan. When it comes to eating, I would say a lot of powerlifters are quite trash when it comes to eating, But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It means that we have room to grow. We have opportunities to work with. And just, for example, looking at quoting an example of a TSG athletes, Sean Moser, I got the opportunity to do his nutrition with him, and we plan things from a big perspective. Instead of like, we're 4 weeks out, 5 weeks out, let's cut stuff now. But 4 weeks out, 5 weeks out, like that guy, he's eating 600 grams of carbohydrates, and on the day of the meet, he's eating 500 grams of carbs, and even the day before, he's eating 500 grams of carbs. And people would go like, is that really like possible when you try to like make weight? They say, yeah, if you plan things right, you plan things from a wider, looking things with a wider lens, you plan things further out, there is a high probability that you can actually weigh in while not feeling like absolute trash, while cutting weight. And that there's research done in combat sport athletes by Artioli and colleagues showing that the consensus is actually that if you cut weight while maintaining a high carbohydrate diet, your performance at the end you are able to maintain your performance much better than if you do not keep a high carbohydrate diet. So the key is to find that range that you can comfortably cut from, and then I would say like periodize your nutrition to fit your training demands. So like what Alfred said, if you have high training volume or whatever and you can't recover, and yet you're depriving yourself of those precious food and nutrients, you're just gonna hit yourself. You're gonna bury yourself deeper in the hole. You have to think about, my training demands right now is, let's say it's like, for example, after training you do a washout block, everything's RPE based, and everything's easy. Yeah, sure. I think that even though you're like 5 months away from comp, I think you can cut some weight now, right? Or maybe not gain weight, right? Things like that, because the training demands are so light and you're just like having fun and just enjoying yourself, trying to resensitize your body to different movements and just not to get bored with just doing the power lifts all the time. I think, that's probably the best time where you can put yourself in a slight deficit, and then so that further on you don't have to cut so much weight. So like what Alfred said makes a lot of sense, and I think people should understand that your nutrition should cater to your training demands. And when is it the hardest, right? During your training block, you potentially have to eat more than. So if you have that end goal in mind, then you can plan towards that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it, obviously, with a lot more information coming out for more specifically the sport of powerlifting, I think things are becoming a lot more professional, and there's a lot more content out there to actually help powerlifters improve their performance. I think it's not just a case of, right, well, I want to do some squats today, then I might do a bit of this, a bit of that, or I'm just going to eat this before I start training. I think everything's becoming a little bit more professional, and people are thinking a lot more about I've got a training program, but exactly as that, I need the program to fit alongside it. And when you were saying there about if I'm 12 weeks out from a competition, or I don't have a competition for a couple of months, right, then actually I can focus on maybe a little bit of a body recomposition, or focus on a little bit of hypertrophy, and then cater the program around that. I think sometimes the nutrition side of things is sort of left underrated. And going back to the first topic that we chatted about, having two coaches with expertise in two different areas, but then still working together, he's only going to be beneficial for the lifter. Just touching on the being far out from a competition, and we touched on there a little bit about the nutrition side of things. What have you found to keep the lifter motivated, or take some time away from competing to work on some weaknesses, such as increasing weight, putting a little bit more muscle on, getting back from injuries? How have you found managing that when people have big gaps between competitions?
Alfred, you can go ahead with this.
Usually what we so typically we don't recommend athletes compete more than at most 3 times a year. And even like me personally, I think 3 times is kind of a push already, just because you don't really have a whole lot of time to build if you kind of look at it in a grand scheme of things. So twice a year is really a good amount, because you technically have 6 months, and in that 6 months you can break things down. What I found that really helps my athletes and our athletes stay motivated is to have the end goal in mind. So one of our athletes from Singapore, for instance, he competes maybe once, maybe even just twice a year. So the gaps are huge, but we break it down in that, okay, we're starting today, your comp is in this time, and we break it down into separate blocks. This block is going to be 6 weeks long. We're focusing on this. So then it kind of takes his mind away from the competition, which is maybe 7 months away from now. Yeah. So he can have like little micro focuses, and at the end we usually have some kind of testing phase, whether it be working up to a heavy single or an AMRAP set. So stuff like that kind of keeps them focused on the task at hand, which is the training in front of them, not so much the competition, which is light years away.
Yeah. Kedric, what's your thoughts on that? Maybe from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think a big part would be understanding what the athlete enjoy. So I know we know that specificity actually provides the most like adaptation, right? Principle specificity. But I had this conversation with a couple of coaches as well, and I think I talked with Mike T about it. But there's a big difference between like transference and specificity. So if we look at specificity, we would say, yeah, squat, bench, deadlift, most specific, you should get the most adaptation. But when we look at, if we include the athlete's lifestyle, and then we have to think about transference. Would that athlete's lifestyle, or like would the motivation or the monotony actually prevent that specificity from transferring into real life gains? Because if someone does the same movements time and time again, one, there is a huge potential of being bored, lack of motivation, just because training is so monotonous and mundane, and people go into the sessions feeling less motivated. So even that is when I think variations of exercises actually can play a role, right? So if an athlete's just like, yeah, man, I am squatting, benching, deadlifting again, I'm sick of it, right? Then throw something different, throw something different, that is still within the realms of providing a similar stimulus and adaptation. For example, like say to quote another of our athlete, right, in Singapore recently, she paused, her best pull was 157.5 kilos at Worlds, and she paused deadlift 155 kilos, right? In one of our recent testing at the end of the block, she paused 2.5 kilos at probably 2 RPE points lower, right? From that point of view, you would probably say that, yeah, I've made progress, I'm pausing 2.5 kilos less than my comp best for my deadlift. But we've not done comp deadlift yet. So this could really motivate the athlete, thinking that, yeah, first at the start, you give them the variation so that they can work on it, right? It's close enough to mimic competition movements, so they can work on it, switch things up, right? But when they realize that they've actually made significant progress at a harder variation without touching the comp variation, they'll be like, yeah, imagine if I start using the comp variation, the comp specific lift again, man, I'm gonna make I have the potential to make even more progress. We can't exactly say what carryover is there one for one, but we know that, yeah, if you can do something that's hard, if it's easier, it's almost likely you could do more when it's easier. So things like that, planning from a long-term point of view, like what Alfred said, we have big blocks, and this block, we say, yeah, this is our focus. We shift the goal, right? It's called the goal gradient hypothesis, or I would say shifting the goalposts. Bring the goal a little bit closer, creating those small wins. And we say, this is the reason why we're doing this. And Alfred brought up a great point. We communicate the goals to the athlete. We get the athlete to buy into the goal, and obviously meet the athlete on the middle ground, because we don't just we are not like a communist country where we dictate what you do. We hear you, we listen, and then we collectively put our thoughts together and find out what's best to bring you towards that goal. Let's say if you compete twice a year, so it's 6 months away. It's quite hard to see where you are 6 months from now. I mean, if I ask you what you're gonna have for dinner 6 months from now, you probably can't tell me. So it's really, really difficult. So bring the goal slightly closer. That's what Alfred said. But like I said, we use for myself. I use different variations. Think about the athlete's psychology, and a good example for Alfred and I, we didn't even plan to give that athlete that test for the pause deadlift. I mean, I don't think there's really much merit in maxing out on a variation, but Alfred and I, we had a talk, and our athlete said that, yeah, I feel like I'm not making strength gains, because I'm so far in the off season. And I said, right, then I said, Alfred, do you think we should just give her singles or doubles, heavy triple, single, doubles? And Alfred and I, we thought collectively, we agreed and said yes. And then at the end, we just let her test her top single, and then it completely shifted her psychology from the part I'm not making gains in the off-season to yeah, I actually made gains and now I'm motivated. So things like that would actually help understanding how the athlete function, communicating the goals to the athlete, and keeping the athlete on track by using small tweaks of changing things around.
Yeah, absolutely. What was quite good listening to both of your takes on that was that you both sort of mentioned the small wins, whether it be the AMRAPs at the end of a block, or doing testing a variation, because it's one of the. I come from a rugby background, so when you're playing rugby week in, week out, it's like, oh well, my performance wasn't very good this week, so I can work on it next week. Or if I lost the game, it's like, right, we can work towards that. I think powerlifting is one of those strange sports where, like you mentioned in there, you might only compete 2-3 times a year, and it's if you do have big chunks of time between competitions, I think sometimes people struggle, or they can training can go off the rails a little bit, or nutrition can go off the rails a little bit. And you both sort of mentioned, look, take that block of time and break it up, and think about what the plan is going to be, whether it be from a nutrition point of view, whether you're going to focus on dropping a little bit of weight or building a little bit of muscle. And finding those wins that, like you mentioned there, Kedric, about the pause deadlift. If that's for them to give them a little bit of motivation to then go into the next block and think, right, actually, come competition time, I'm going to be, PBs will be falling, and what's being mentioned throughout this podcast is it's ultimately got to benefit the lifter from whether it be a health point of view, a performance point of view, so that they get the best out of working with you two as coaches. Quite a few topics covered through there. I think there was quite a little bit of depth going into everything of it. For everyone listening, it's the first time I've had a chat with two people through a computer screen. So I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. From everything that we've chatted through there, what would be both of your sort of take home points or words of wisdom for everyone listening?
Alfred can go first because he's usually like the older one, so he's more wise than me. So Alfred, please go.
That's basically his way of saying, like, I'm old, I'm more long-winded than him. But all jokes aside, big take-home. A couple, actually. One is, don't be hesitant to share your thoughts with other coaches. We're all in the same sport. Nobody has the magic key to all the gains. You probably have something that somebody else doesn't know, but they also have something that you might not know. So it's always a good idea to bounce ideas back and forth, and kind of it keeps you humble to know that there's always opportunities to learn. But also from an athlete's perspective, some of the feedback we got in the past before we even started co-coaching was that people thought that more people touching the pot, so to speak, is a bad idea, but that's not always the case. It's not that, the process of co-coaching isn't just a bunch of people jump in and we just throw in ideas. We collectively work through it and we work together for the athlete. It's not so much just we throw in everything and make a big soup and just, here you go, have it. We work together as a team, and like I said, at the end of the day, we do everything we can together for the athlete.
Really good points to finish on. From a younger version, if you want to say, Kedric, what's your take on that?
I mean, granted that Alfred is like at least 7 years older than me, but we both look around the same the same age.
I'll edit that bit out. Don't worry, I'll edit that bit out.
Okay. We both look around the same age, so it's fine, right? People can't tell the difference. But I would say, Alfred took the words out from my mouth. But I would say, from a different perspective, like Alfred said, don't be afraid to share. But I would say, as a coach, don't be afraid to accept different opinions, be open-minded, right? The whole process of co-coaching is the same thing, right? Alfred isn't afraid to share what he thinks. I shouldn't be afraid of accepting a new idea, So it's the same thing with everything in life. Be open-minded. That doesn't mean you don't have principles, but be open-minded, hear others out. And perhaps that could potentially shift your perspective a little. And that I think is a critical component of life, being open-minded, always being open to different perspective and learning. And from an athlete's point of view, I mean, like, if coaches are constantly improving every single day, we're not plateauing. It means that we are striving towards, we don't think we're perfect. We, like Alfred said, we don't have the keys, we are constantly refining and progressing. For an athlete, you're the same, don't think that I want to get things done in 1 year and then, I'm done. I got the key in 1 year. But look at it from the point of progression. Strive for progression instead of like perfection, as cliche as that might sound. But be process oriented, enjoy the process, and then naturally the goals will fall into place. I find that a lot of young lifters always look at the goal. I have to hit like 700 pounds on my deadlift by X time, and then what if you don't? What if you don't? I wish saying, what if you don't? Is it the end of the world? No, it's not, right? Powerlifting, they don't bring you money. It's not like if you work in a company and you fail to secure a deal, your company's going to go bankrupt, right? In the grand scheme of things, like your total is almost, the impact of your total in the grand scheme of your life is probably negative. Like there's no big impact, you know? So if you think about setting something so strict and just restricting yourself so much, you might not achieve your goal, and also put yourself through a lot of misery. But I would say, you know, focus on the process, enjoying making each session better than the other. You know, if you perform 1 rep more than the previous session, you're doing better. If you perform the same amount of reps at a lower RPE than the previous session, you're doing better, right? So focus on that small wins and that progression. And yeah, basically don't think of getting like instant gratification. And yeah, contrary to popular belief, despite being younger, I seem to be more long-winded. So yeah.
2 really, really good points to finish on. Yeah, I think everyone can learn a little bit more from a coach's point of view. 100%. If a coach turns around and says they've got all the answers, they're not reading enough, they're not learning enough. Yeah, you know, a couple of times I've got no issue turning around and saying I'm not sure what the answer is, but I'll go and find it out and try and learn. And if I develop, the lifter or the client I'm working with is gonna progress as well. And as a lifter, yeah, you know, trusting the process and having the communication and exactly as you say, you know, finding those small wins and yeah, progress over perfection is a quote that I really, really enjoy using when I'm working with my clients. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. Really, really enjoyed chatting to you both. Like I said at the start, I've been looking forward to this since we set it up. For everyone listening who might want to follow the content that you put out there or get involved in coaching or any questions on the topics that we've covered, where can people find you and see the content that you put out there?
For me, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for myself, it's just mainly Instagram. I do a lot of my stuff there. My email's on my Instagram. So if you want to reach out via Instagram and I don't reply, it's not because I'm trying to ignore you, because it's the Instagram function that sometimes you just go into like your message request and you don't really see it as a direct message. I think prevents the creeps from sliding into DMs too much. But send me an email. My email is on my Instagram. So if I do not respond via Instagram, email me. I'm very quick to respond on my email. So I would say the main thing would be Instagram. Obviously, we have the Strength Guys Instagram as well. You can search. You can look us up there. People, we have a like social media person, so that person will look at the direct messages more. But if you want to work with like either Alfred or myself, just say, yeah, you know, like, oh, I heard this podcast and I want to work with Alfred and Kedric, right? Just like put that in the message so we know that you want to work with us. But yeah, that's the way you can reach out to me.
Spot on.
And likewise, you know, if as a whole, we the Strength Guys have their own Instagram. So if you want to get a hold of us through that, you can just shoot us a DM and just specify that you want to work with Kedric, or you have questions for Kedric and Alfred, or Kedric and Alfred, whichever. Or directly, you can get a hold of me at Alfred or at Alfred TSG for Instagram, and email is just alfred@thestrengthguys.com.
Absolutely awesome. Thanks a lot for you both for taking the time to chat with me. Like I say, I know I've said it about 3 or 4 times now, but really enjoyed chatting to you both. The work that you two guys do, the work that the Strength Guys do, having followed you for some time now, everyone listening, 100% follow what these guys are doing. Yeah, I know it benefits from speaking to you guys and for you guys, and you know, following the work that you do. It only helps me as a coach and a lifter myself, and to be able to speak to you guys and get a little bit more content out there for everyone listening is absolutely awesome. So thanks for taking the time to chat with me. Thanks to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.